Where in the world? There we go. All right, my friends. We can get started. Again, thank you so much for being here. Hi, Harish. Thank you for being here. Again, my name is Vanessa Damro. I'm the Coacharya Community Manager. I'm excited to be here with you guys. This is absolutely a phenomenal session. I'm excited for the conversation. Keep it interactive. We're definitely co-creating some experiences here today and with Awake, Aware, Arise. So thank you again for being here. I will just start off with a brief little introduction. We have today's session a tale of two bridges and two brains, and we have Dr. Colleen Lightbody and Mr. Tony Latimer. Tony and Colleen are going to be presenting an interactive dialogue here. So again, definitely opportunity for questions and thoughts and insights and reflections, all of that good stuff. We're going to be talking about how we can use the philosophy of Awake, Aware, Rise today to be able to coach ourselves, to be able to coach our clients, to be able to weather the uncertainty, the changes that we are experiencing right now, and to be able to create transformation and achieve like significant results. So an incredible session. Everybody needs to be here. If you miss it, no problem. We'll be on YouTube. This conversation is going to be embedded in neurosciences, philosophy, psychology, and coaching competencies. So prepare for your brain to be tingling in all the best ways, and for your heart to be tingling in all the best ways. This is going to be a wonderful conversation. With that being said, I'm going to pass it over to you, Colleen. You can give yourself a little introduction and we'll bring it over to Tony and get started.
Great. So I think, Tony, should we just get going and we'll kind of let everyone get to know us as we go along?
I think they'll figure it out, won't they? They'll figure it out as we go. Yeah, absolutely.
So we came up with this name for this talk, which probably will emerge as we go through the talk. Really, what Tony and I were thinking about and reflecting on is that coaching and coaching conversations are like bridges, and the similarity is that they embody connection, they reduce isolation, and they're purposeful as well. So bridges open up ways to cross from one place to another. They are efficient, they're strategic, and they close gaps basically in knowledge and possibility. And that engineers build bridges, and like engineers, coaches and their clients are problem solvers, learning, improving, exercising, strategizing, adapting. So the middle of the bridges we'll take a little bit deeper, but that was kind of just the background. Then of course we called the talk Two Bridges and Two Brains, because hopefully, Tony, you and I have two brains, and bringing them present to this conversation as far as we can, even though it's late in the evening for some of us. And we all know that our coaching conversations involve at least two brains, and we'd like you to bring your brains to the session. So Tony and I really, like Nessa said, it's an interactive dialogue. Vanitha, you have been set up to that you do connect, and we really want to encourage people to ask questions, to talk to Tony and I. We have not got a prepared presentation, but it's just really about us sharing our knowledge of neuroscience. Tony's a master coach, very experienced coach in the corporate world, and we're connecting with coaching and neuroscience so that we can, in terms of this wonderful conference that is being held, is firstly awakening to the realization of what is possible in people, being aware of what is our responsibilities and what can we do, and then arising to address this and actually become the human beings that we're supposed to be, both as coaches and in other areas of our lives. So Tony, that's a bit of an intro from me for a bit. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks. And so as Colleen said, when we were invited to come out and play, the Awake, Aware, Arise. Now, if I remember correctly, that philosophy comes from one of the older scriptures, right? The Vedic Upanishads. And we're taking that theme, and that kind of inspired me to apply it to what coaching is. And I'm a total believer in simplicity. I think, you know, the simplicity of mastery is what it's all about. So we wanted to look at what you can do as a coach with people, what you can do as an individual with yourself, and take it through this awake, aware, arise structure. Because when you simplify coaching, the process, it just comes down to those three areas. The awake, which is you as an individual getting that realization somehow that something needs to change. And then we're going to explore how people get that awakening in different ways in their personal life, in their in a coaching organization, in a corporate setting. And I'm going to talk about what I see happening there, and then get Colleen to just dig in and say, so when this happens to somebody, what's going on in the brain? The aware is the part of the coaching interaction where the thinking happens. You start to figure out some learning, some insights, some, you know, here's what I need to do. So we're going to explore that and how that happens. And then the arise is actually putting something into practice. Now, I believe it's not too difficult to get the awakening. You know, somebody tells you you're doing bad, and now you know, you've got the feedback. We've all been to school, so we know how to learn. We know how to do the thought process. But what I've noticed over the years is building new habits is the really hard part. So that's comes the crunch piece. And I also suspect if we understand a little better what's going on in our brains, I've always likened it to learning to drive a car. Back in the days when cars typically had manual gearboxes, there were people who drove cars and crunched the gears and the people who didn't. And generally speaking, the more appreciation you had of what's going on under the hood, how a gearbox works, how it connects to an engine, how the clutch plate works, the more in sympathy with the mechanism you were, the more likely that you were going to drive it well. And I think coaching, whether it's self-coaching or coaching others, is a little bit similar to that. The more you understand the mechanics of what's going on inside the brain, I think the better you're going to do it. So we're hoping to pick into Colleen's brain tonight and really just say, okay, as we go through this fairly simple structure or framework of what coaching is, let's see if we can get a better understanding of what's happening in the mechanics, in the engine and the gearbox as we go through that. So, Colleen and I thought we'd start with just talking about the awakening piece. And
Tony, can I just jump in here? I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're looking at the Q&A there, but there's quite an interesting question from, is it Bhaskar, where he's, and it feels really relevant to what you're saying about understanding what's under the hood. So he's got this leader who's really good with people, this leader who's not really good with numbers. And how can he, obviously he's berating himself for being bad at numbers, being good at people. And how can we manage that? And I think what you've just said is quite important. There's like understanding what's under the hood, bearing in mind you're talking to a girl, which I don't even, you know, I don't know, there's an engine or something there. But if I was really learning about a car, it's about understanding self. And I guess maybe just a short answer to Bhaskar's question would be that where he's saying, how can I help this person remove himself from his self-imposed limitation? I guess it's about helping him understand himself, understanding what is the process that he's created in his brain, probably over years and years and years of creating his subconscious awareness that what he is useless at numbers. And also the negative berating himself like that, that our brains are biased towards self-criticism, towards negativity. So he will focus rather on what he can't do than on what he can do. So thank you for putting Nessa, for putting that into the chat there, because it's a beautiful question. So
Yeah.
Not that as coaches we're teaching our clients necessarily about their brains, but as coaches, what we're needing to understand is that process of hardwiring that occurs in the brain over years and years of experience that then becomes that person's reality. Whereas in actual fact, he's got a whole other engine that he could possibly drive, and it's possible to create new wiring. So just kind of going straight there, and maybe also briefly referencing, because I'm sure we'll talk about it right through the process, is neuroplasticity, Tony. Firstly,
Yes.
Everybody can change. So this, you know, if we awaken to the fact that we have the capacity to change, I think that's
a good point, and we should pin that one out there and say everything is up for change. So, for example, in the coaching world, we come across a lot of situations where people go through personality assessments and they get put in boxes with labels. And I'm going to put it out here now, guys, that's wrong. Okay, that is just down wrong. Don't ever turn around to me and say, oh, I'm an INTJ. No, you are not. Yeah, you are not.
You're a human.
Yes, you're a human being, and everything is up for change. And the problem is the minute we put labels on it. Now, if we look at that question from Pascal that we copied in there, the leader, he's good with people and not good with numbers. There's a judgment right there.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot coach somebody from that judgment. And as a coach, you also have to recognize and hear judgments that people are holding about themselves, and then play it back to them. Just open the door, shine the light, go like, you know, you're right, that's just a judgment. That is not true.
Absolutely.
Absolutely not true.
And again, it also references what Vanitha's comment is there. Yes, Vanitha, everyone's intelligent. And I mean, what is intelligence? It's probably a judgment call in the first place. But we all have strengths, and we're good at some things, we're passionate about some things, and we're not passionate. There is a certain amount of genetic inheritance that we have. However, the plasticity of the brain is such that we have the opportunity to change quite profoundly and quite dramatically. And I know many coaches that are on this call and will listen to this call have seen remarkable shifts in their clients because we believe in them and we believe the capacity to change. Now, what for me is really beautiful about the neuroscience is the science backs it up. It's not merely a philosophical and spiritual belief in people's capacity. So whether we call it intelligence from an IQ, EQ, SQ, whatever it is that we understand that. And that's, again, I'm glad you share my allergy to assessments, because people love to lock themselves into that assessment, and that's where they stay. Whereas coaching can take these assessments that obviously are sometimes required, but they can help the people say, so how can I change this? Or how can I develop this? Or what do I need to address and do differently?
Yes. There's a process. It's quite fascinating. There's a process that people go through. We take in so many signals through all our senses. Data's coming at us so fast. Now, your brain has almost, it's in computer terms, it's made up of reusable objects. The neural pathways, the neurons, they can be reused. So infinite capacity, effectively. But the problem is our conscious awareness can only handle a few things at once. So what I think happens is all the data comes in, and our brain does like billions of transactions and pattern matching and stuff, and then gives us a binary output. Yeah, black or white, good or bad, you know, and when people go like, oh, I've got a gut feel, that's what's coming. That's just the binary output your brain's got. And maybe we talk a bit later about how you can leverage that and train your brain in the same way that we train artificial intelligence, where we backflush through the algorithms to improve them. That's a really good use of that. So let's just go back to the awake bit, getting these realizations. For example, people tell us stuff. We get feedback from people. I was told, for example, over and over and over and over again as a child that I was slow and I was lazy. It was only years later I eventually discovered that I wasn't. I was just mentally efficient.
Love it.
Yeah, that was my way, and that works for me, right? People get feedback. So here's the interesting things. Ways that we get feedback. In the corporate world for a moment, you have a year-end appraisal. And I've never met anybody who either enjoyed giving or receiving year-end appraisals. That's another bugbear of mine. I used to go work for organizations where, you know, HR had ticked the box and we've done a 360 every year. And they're another thing I'm not a big fan of. Because again, it's interpretations, it's judgments, and therefore not particularly helpful. You've got to dig beneath. I used to see people come to their first coaching session and they would say, oh, HR told us we've got to bring our 360. Do we have to work from this? And I would say, no, it's entirely your choice. If it's raised anything for you that you'd like to discuss, that's great. But, you know, what do you want to do with it? And without fail, every one of them used to turn around, drop it in the bin and go, okay, we've got rid of that rubbish. And here's the weird thing. I can even remember one client of mine, very senior lady, globally overseeing merger of a couple of big multinationals. And she brought her 360 to our first coaching session. And she said, do we have to work from this? And I said, no, not if you don't want to. And she said, great, and dumped it in the bin and said, got rid of that rubbish. When I asked her and said, so tell me about it, what was it you didn't like? I mean, we're not going to look at it, but what was it that, you know, triggered such a strong emotional reaction? She said, well, for a start, it's absolute nonsense. Everybody in my 360 said I was an amazing leader and it was all wonderful. So it's not just an emotional reaction rejecting the negative stuff. I've had clients who reject the positive stuff. So here's what I want to know, Colleen. Why does that happen? What's going on in our brains? I get, because I notice for myself, for example, I get people who occasionally will sort of go, can I give you some feedback? And I can just feel my hackles coming up. Like, no, no, you can't. Yeah? When I want your feedback, if I want to improve on something, I'll come and ask for it. Why do we have these strong negative emotional reactions? What's going on?
Yeah, so, and I mean, I think it's very interesting what you said about she was rejecting the positive feedback, which I do think is not as common. And I think almost all of us, we biologically are basically, our brains are crafted to move away from whatever it is that is negative. So be it the saber-toothed tiger that jumps out in front of us, or be it the manager who's saying she's not quite up to par, any kind of negative comment or negative feedback that we're getting from another person, we will perceive that as a threat to our lives, interestingly enough. And by the way, social threats are often actually experienced even more strongly in the brain than physical threats. So our physical pain network has actually mapped itself on our social pain network in the brain, Tony, which is really interesting. So what's actually happening when you get that feedback and that feedback is negative, it's literally an attack on your life. And the affective parts of your brains, the emotional parts that respond to physical pain, will also react to any kind of social pain. And negative feedback means that you're not part of the group, you're not okay, you're not good enough, you don't belong, you don't fit, whatever it is, you're being rejected. Okay, we experience that as physical pain. So also in terms of, and I see Vanita's asking some really fabulous questions here. She's talking about biases, and isn't spirituality going away from bias? Yes, Vanita, if you're articulating it in the way I think you are, is that our biases are our unconscious automatic responses. When we talk about spirituality, and the perspective I talk about spirituality in neuroscience, is we're talking about getting away from these unconscious instinctive reactions and getting into our conscious brain, which may sound like a bit of a paradox, because how can consciousness be spirituality? In actual fact, I will align the two completely if we can. But getting into our conscious brain and being able to say, what wisdom can I get from this feedback? How can I use it? Is it appropriate or is it not appropriate? And getting away from that primal reactive response, which has been triggered through the negative feedback.
Mm.
Yeah, and Som's saying it's negative feedback, quite a disaster. But what we need to do is, obviously we need to emerge out of this instinctive reactive response and be able to tolerate and make useful feedback. And we don't train people to do that, and we don't train people to deliver feedback in a way that they can receive it in a and I hate the feedback sandwich and constructive conversation.
No, not yes. Shoot that one down. Yes, yes. We can talk about how to give feedback properly, but that's not the topic of tonight. But yes, you're right. Yeah. That is it. The other thing I think that's interesting is I actually believe that what people should do is step up and own it. Have that greater awareness and be constantly saying, which part of my life would I like to examine? What would I like to get feedback on? Because when I come and ask for feedback, I'm okay with that because I'm asking. I'm taking control. And I think that's generally the only instance where I see people progressing well with feedback. Is when they've got that realization, hey, something needs to change. I'm going to go and get the feedback from people. So it's under my control, because then we don't get that negative emotional reaction to it. Yeah.
And that would relate to creating a growth mindset, which is like one of the hot topics in our leadership world at the moment. Where that growth mindset is directly related to neuroplasticity, is that we have got the capacity to change. And so it's okay to not be perfect, and it's because there's something more that we can do. So
I'm going to push another one out there and see if we can trigger some debate from people there. I believe, and people often forget this, anybody, barring physical limitations, anybody can do anything they want to. Barring physical limitations, you can do anything you want to. You just got to learn some stuff and practice it. And once we get our heads around that, I mean, the root of performance issues in organizations, generally we hire for intellectual capability, because intellectual capability is a physical limitation. Yeah. But one thing that companies are pretty good at is the test for hiring. You know, when they say this job requires a university degree, that's not because of the knowledge you got on that degree, not unless you're going to be a doctor or a dentist or something. It's because getting a university degree is a test of your intellectual capability to a certain level. Then you get the job and they teach you how to do the job, which means you could pretty much do any job in the organization that you have the desire to do, that you want to. And I think that's something we tend to forget.
So, Tanya, I love what you're saying, and I'm 100%, but I think we need to really qualify this want to, because we have the capacity to achieve anything we want to achieve if we want to. Okay, and that want to is so important, because there is a genetic capacity. Yes, physical ability, but for example, I am well known for saying that I cannot do Excel spreadsheets. But guess what, Tony? I don't want to learn how to do Excel spreadsheets.
I don't want to, yes, exactly.
Energy that it takes. So there is that sort of genetic, hereditary versus environment debate. And we know that we are born with certain abilities and certain skills.
Yeah, traits and predispositions, right? I mean, you know, Excel spreadsheets are the one thing, I think they're the most perfect example. You know, the world divides into two. Those who use Excel spreadsheets and those who don't. Those who know what a pivot table is and those who don't. Yeah, I sit on the fence. I know what a pivot table is. I just have no need or desire to use one. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that. But it also leads to one of the things that goes wrong in organizations. So few instances of people engaging in the conversations about people's aspirations. What is it they want to do?
Yeah.
And
exactly.
you know, when you get people who've been in a job and doing okay and then it falls off, it's usually because nobody's talking about their aspirations, and our aspirations are growing and developing all the time. Even if it's an aspiration to stay doing this job and being really good at it for the next 20 years till I retire, that's an aspiration. And if we don't recognize it and we can't work to it, then we're creating the very problems that we're having. And then we start putting labels on people. And what was it? I think, about 15 years ago, the Arbinger Institute wrote that book, Leadership and Self-Deception.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to this whole thing about judgments about people. Our judgments become the belief we hold about somebody. Our beliefs drive our behavior. And then we hit the basic physics of human interaction, the third law of motion, action and reaction. We behave towards people in line with the judgments we hold about them. Mm-hmm. And therefore, we trigger the behavior that we were trying to avoid in the first place.
Yeah.
We create the behavior we don't want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it becomes it's that conditioned narrative. So that it's not only that we become what we want, but sometimes we become what we don't want, because it's that the old story of the golfer who says, I will not hit the ball in the hole, I will not hit the ball in the hole, I will not, I mean in the rough, I won't hit it in the rough, I won't hit in the rough, and then he hits the ball in the rough, because he's kind of programming his mind at a conscious level so that his subconscious brain then responds to that. So sometimes we actually create what it is we don't want. And this is not some weird voodoo spiritual thing, this is neuroscience as well.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, now, Vanita was just saying that aspirations are also masked because of the active reptilian brain.
Yeah, we've got this.
Tell me a bit more about that.
That stops us from actually understanding what we are capable of and what we want, because we're in the survival mode when we are not conscious. And most people, to be honest, we are wandering around. We've got reptiles running around this globe at the moment, like you cannot believe, because people are afraid, people are uncertain, people have that we don't know what's going to happen and what's the future. And so therefore what people do is, as soon as we're in fear, as soon as we're in threat, we retreat, consciousness drops, and threat responses rise. And then nobody is aspiring to anything except to survive. So definitely this threat space and organization that creates a threat environment is limiting people's belief in themselves, belief in possibility. And I think it's very important for us as coaches to remember that we're coaching people who are in a threat environment. So where we traditionally, Tony, I don't know about you, but we traditionally are coaching around goals and aspirations, and that a lot of my coaching at the moment is around survival and managing my own mental space before I've even got high level goals and aspirations.
I would agree. I mean, quite naturally at the moment, pretty much all of my clients were working remotely. And each week there's the sort of, okay, here's what I need to work on, here's the strategy, here's the business things, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm noticing more and more in the last few months, for each of them, you just pick up a little sense of there's a tension, there's something, and you just go, so what's going on for you right now with that? You know, there was a breath, there was an expression, there was a pause, and yeah, they've all got something a little deeper that needs doing. Yeah.
So I guess that's the aware part, Tony, that we're starting to come to here. Am I right? That's about that.
I think so. One of the things that I just wanted to touch on as well for the awakeness was the role of the coach. When we're into that coaching conversation, when somebody comes in, sits down, you know, in one of those chairs, and I've always said the role of the coaching is the process of triggering thinking, nothing more. In the corporate setting, we coach for behavioral change, nothing more. And the job of the coach, I think, is to observe and explore. So we observe it, we call it out. So observe and explore. And one of the things I've noticed is very powerful is when we start, and there's this, I tell you what, Colleen, we're going to spend this entire session this evening just going on our bandboxes, right? Our favorite hobby horses. So we've just wiped out assessments, okay? Now let's go and wipe out the other thing I don't like, coaching models.
Okay.
Right. There's a million coaching models in the world. Every coach has got them. Some coach training schools teach you to create models. And here's the interesting thing. I found the sort of the 4-step models, the 5-step models. I even found a 17-step model on the internet once. I did a search. And there's a problem. They all start with the goal. Now, I could possibly allow, if you're a life coach, that somebody's going to walk in and we're going, okay, so what are your goals? What is it you want? What's the beautiful future you want to work on? But certainly in the corporate setting, whether it's the external coach doing executive coaching or internal coaches or manager using coaching skills, doesn't matter. You can't start with the goal because they all go goal. And then they go, okay, now let's talk about the problem. And that drives us backwards into the root cause of the problem. And the one thing you're trying to do with managers in a corporate environment is get them out of being problem solvers. So you're going completely the wrong way. The key I found, and you can all have this for free, try it out, it will work. Focus on helping the person you're coaching get absolute clarity on where they are now. What's the thing that we're working on in this coaching conversation? And then just play it backwards. So you listen and you play back without any attachment to being right. You stretch it, you test it until they go, yeah, that's it, that's where I am. We don't care why you're here. We don't care why you've got the problem, but just getting that stunning clarity. So the analogy I use is, so in Singapore, recent decade, we've had some years where Indonesia's been burning the forests and the smog comes up and we get really bad smog. And imagine you're in the city center and that's it, the haze, thank you, Vinitha. You can't see a yard in front of your face. And finally, you trip over a taxi and you jump in the cab and you go, oh, thank heavens for that. Take me to the airport. Cab driver's going to say, I'd love to, but I can't because I have no idea where we are. You can't go anywhere until you've got absolute clarity on where you are now. Now, if the wind changes and then the haze lifts, he's going to go, okay, that's where we're going. And then we can start to question, and then they start to ask you, so where are you going? The airport. Okay, which terminal? Yeah, so they're sort of focusing on the future to start planning the journey. So if you do one thing going forward with your people to give them that awakeness of where they are, help them get clarity on exactly where they are now, then you can start moving.
May I clarify that, qualify that just to a certain degree, is in order to drive the car, I think we do first need to learn how to change the clutch, do the gear. So the models and the tools are useful. They're useful as an entry into coaching. Coaching is difficult and there's no question about it. It's not intuitive. It's not a default state of our brain. Our default state is to be egocentric, is to think that we have the answers to everything, to believe that we're right, etc. So coaching is really consciousness. And initially you need those tools, but as you as a master coach know, is that what you're doing now in terms of master coaching, or the power that you're providing for your coachees, is to actually be present with them in a way that allows them. And I don't think you're really talking about just being present with where are you right now, tell me all about the problem, because clearly you're not the therapist, but it's about who are you being? What is, as you said, what is that emotion that you're feeling? What is that sudden folding of your arms, and helping that at a level of who am I in my deep subconscious conditioned narratives and beliefs and identity, so that then we can decide where is it that I'm going and how do I get there. And and so yeah, I also want to kick the tools out, but I'm going to kind of just keep them a little bit on, because I think it's useful as to start our journey as coaches.
Oh, I think definitely I can understand people sort of going, okay, that gives me kind of a frame to work within. But I think you have to very quickly get past that. To be honest, I can teach people to coach in a couple of days very effectively without any model at all. Mm-hmm. So yes, they can be helpful. But the one thing we have to keep in mind as well is if you go read, and I know a lot of the people on the call tonight are sort of working through their credentialing process. It specifically says in ICF that if you're applying for the most senior levels of coaching exams, getting your MCC, if you betray structures, models, and pre-prepared questions, you will never be awarded mastery. So you've got to kind of, you have to let go. You have to let go. There was a question.
Yeah, Vanita's talking about intuition, and I'm also even going to connect it to Baska, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, about talking about the heart of coaching. And we are talking, and at the risk of sounding kind of woo-woo, which I like to hold on to my neuroscience to avoid me, sounding woo-woo. But it is about using our intuition. But intuition is not necessarily some weird thing that we're getting a message from the ether about what it is that's happening. It's truly being present with another human being and with ourselves as coaches. And master coaches are present with themselves to what is going on for me. Tony, you spoke about these pieces of data that we're interpreting, hundreds and millions of pieces of data at any one time, whether it's in a coaching conversation, whether it's in a virtual engagement or whatever. So going to that much deeper level of what am I experiencing here? And then also helping our coachee access what they're experiencing here at a level of consciousness that is beyond what they are taught to how to think and how to be. And I'm just connecting it to what Baska's saying there, in that he's talking about bringing that kind of sacred space from the boardroom into the classroom, into underprivileged people, where it doesn't matter what the education of the person is. We all, we've very rarely given the opportunity to self-discover at that kind of deep identity level.
Yes, yes. And just going back to Anurada's comment about, I'm not a fan of use models in parts or whatever. I think one of the things that you should do as a coach is put as many tools in the toolkit as possible. If you notice the mechanic when he gets under your car, or the plumber when he gets under your sink to fix something, they don't sort of reach up, get a tape measure, measure the size of the nut, and then go and measure the spanners. They just look at it and they go, aha, and they reach into the bag and they pull out, this is the one. The more trust your subconscious, the more tools you've got in the toolbox, the right thing to do, say, use, will come up in the moment as it happens.
Be present, exactly what they're saying here. The coach's agenda.
Yes, okay. Exactly.
We've got about another 20 minutes before we open up for question and answer, Tony, so I don't want to rush this. Are we
So here's what I'd like to ask you about. The awareness bit, the learning bit, and I think maybe we just focus this one a bit on the coaches. I want to just describe to you what I do and what I teach people to do, and then get you to help us understand what's going on in the brain when that happens. So I've noticed, once we know where we are, what I find very effective is to kind of then flip somebody to a future when the problem is solved, whatever it is they're working on. And what I do is get them to explore the behaviors of that future. So what's happening differently, and going around all the different people, themselves, the others, as many people as they can think of who are in that future. What seems to happen, let me just take a step back. the one question I never ask anybody is, so what are you going to do to get to your desired future? Yeah, which sounds silly because that's what coaching is about, helping people get absolute clarity on where they are now, absolute clarity on where they need to be in the future, and then absolute clarity on what they need to do differently to get there. But that last bit is the one you should never, ever ask, because if you do that, you're asking their conscious awareness, and the chances are they're going to say, well, I don't know, if I knew that, I wouldn't be talking to you, would I? Yeah. Now, what I've noticed is, as you get them to talk about the future and all the behaviors, their brain seems to work very quickly and figure out the behavioral change, and therefore they start to already formulate very quickly the plan of change that needs to happen for themselves and for others. What I also get them to do is, for each of the behaviors they talk about, is to talk about the emotions associated with that. So when you're doing this, how will that feel? If it's for other people, you just get them to just speculate. How might they feel? And what seems to happen is, as we think about those emotions, it builds the motivation to actually go do this, to go and put my change plan into practice. And sometimes it even seems to trigger a thought of like, oh, if in that place in the future, when they're doing this and I'm doing that, they're going to feel that good and inspired and motivated. Oh, maybe right now they're not. So that's what from anecdotal evidence and experience in my analysis, that's what I think's going on. What's happening from a neuroscience perspective there?
Sure. Okay. Probably lots of answers there. So let's just start a couple that probably would be really useful for us to understand as coaches, is that when we take people to that future state, and I love the fact that you don't like the goal word, because it's, and I love the way you just said flip to the future. I think that's just so much more evocative. Is what you're doing is you immediately are creating a positive neurochemical state in the brain. It's quite simple. If I ask you to do something that upsets you, okay, what's going to happen is the dopamine's going to drop, the norepinephrine's going to rise, the endorphins are going to go down. If I ask you to think of something that makes you happy, or that a person that you really love or care for, immediately you're going to get a rise in serotonin, dopamine, you know, the right kind of neurochemical state that actually create connections. So when we talk neurochemicals, we get neurochemicals that are neurotransmitters, and they allow the flow of information across the neural pathways through the synapse, and we get neurochemicals that are neural inhibitors. As soon as you're speaking about something that's negative or something that's problematic, you're getting the either too much production of kind of epinephrine or norepinephrine, which stops us from thinking, or we're getting cortisol, which is a neural inhibitor, stops us from thinking. So quite simply, biologically, merely asking people to envision a future state and then stay there, because it's all very well for you to think of something positive, but we want you to really go deeper so that we can build and build and build the production of the positive neurochemicals. So that's the thing for a start. The other thing is, as well, is when people are thinking about what do I have to do to get there? Or people are thinking about, why is this a problem? Okay. Immediately what they're doing is that they are tracking the existing neural pathways that they've already wired, probably so, they've gone over and over and over again at 2 o'clock in the morning, that has become this rigid pathway and there's no way to get out of it. As opposed to envisioning a future state and connecting with emotions, really important, connecting with behaviors, connecting with people. Our brains are social. Okay, so when we say, what impact will this have on your team? What will your children be saying about you? Those kind of questions help people to go at a deeper level. Firstly, it calms the brain. So from an electrical brainwave activity, the brain waves are much calmer when people are in a positive future state. Okay, open, expansive. We're creating that alpha brainwave state where great mastery occurs. As opposed to when we ask them, what do you do? Then we're going into, oh, okay, that's a beta state. That's a brainwave state of, I've got to practically, consciously figure this out. So neurochemistry, creating the right brainwave environment for people to actually start thinking differently. Yeah, so that's just the start. I mean, there would be many, many more reasons why, but I do concur completely. If you ask somebody what they need to do, they're going to get stuck. If you ask them to envisage where they want to be, they're going to be able to reflect. And that's what we're doing, is we're creating that reflective state for them where more things become possible.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the bit that I found triggers. I mean, you see people solving really complex issues that they've been battling with for a long time in like a 10-15 minute conversation. Yeah, it's phenomenally fast, the speed it happens.
Exactly. I just also mention the emotions, because I think it's really important, because a lot of coaches are very nervous of emotions, but we're not scared of emotions, and we're not scared of positive emotions, and we're not scared of negative emotions. Yes, I know I was talking about creating a positive emotional state, but if there's something that is deeply meaningful and actually poignant that can trigger some kind of deep emotional state, emotions drive decision making. If we didn't have emotions, we become pathologically incapable of making decisions and making choices. So as coaches, we are secure and safe with emotions, so that we allow our coachees to be able to sit with any kind of emotion. And how do we process those emotions so that we can do something with them? So Vinitha, I hope I'm answering you there. We address emotional conversations by addressing the emotion, exactly like Tony was saying. We are present with the whole being of the coachee. We're not needing them to be in a happy state in order to move forward.
No, exactly. And one thing I've noticed with newer coaches is that they too tend to be, they'll spot something, but they're afraid of pressing the button in case it's like, you know, they go down there into that emotional state. How do I get them back out? I would always say, like, don't be scared of it.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of it. So in my coaching room, I've got those two nice comfortable leather chairs, and there's a little coffee table in between. There's nothing there except a box of tissues.
I love it.
Yeah? And the key, I think my favorite phrase is, people experience physical manifestations of the emotional content of the neural pathway they are currently accessing. See, Colleen gets it. I'm going to say that slowly for everybody else. People experience physical manifestations of the emotional content of the neural pathway they are currently accessing. Sometimes that physical manifestation may be an excretion of a saline liquid from the ducts around the eye sockets, which some people call crying. And coaches get afraid, and they go like, oh, you're upset. No, they're not upset. They are simply having a physical manifestation of the emotional content of the neural pathway they're accessing. And what do you do when that happens? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Whether it happens in a workplace relationship, you know, manager with subordinate, whether it's coach with the coachee, I found the key is you just stay silent. I would suggest maybe just take away their eye contact, because for some reason, if you don't give them eye contact, they assume that you're not there. So it feels a bit more private, and you just wait until they're ready to come through it. And when they come out of it the other side, you don't say anything. You don't say, oh, they're there, or it's all right. You say nothing. You allow them to go through and come out, and the bond that is then created is phenomenally stronger. Yeah. Because you've allowed it to be okay and safe and not embarrassing for them to go where they needed to go. And I've had some very senior male and female corporate executives who sat in my coaching room and just had that experience.
So I always say, Tony, when I get home from work and I say to my daughter, I've made 3 people cry today, and she goes, Mommy, I wouldn't be so proud of that if I was you. And it's not that coaches make people cry, but we understand that emotions drive behavior. And what I think you're saying as well is that for me, it's really important that we as coaches and I'm putting inverted commas here, validate emotions. It's not to say that we approve of them, but just like you saying, by being silent and allowing the space for that emotion is a unique experience for most people, because most of us, and I can tell you, it doesn't matter where I teach in the world, it's the same for almost all cultures. We spend our entire life saying to our kids, Nessa, this is for your 4-year-old. We say to people, don't get upset, don't be angry, don't take it personally. That's insane. We're human beings. We have emotions as human beings. What a coach does, not all coaches, but hopefully what most coaches do is create that safe space for, guess what, you are an emotional being. And that's actually part of what is actually going to make you really powerful. And it's not about us saying, it's okay to cry and don't worry, because then we say, oh, it's your emotion's not real, but we allow those emotions and we help people process through them and move on to what they're
And an interesting one, so anybody on the call who's ever gets stuck in that one and then you think like, oh, what am I going to do? Here's a little technique. Think back a decade or so to the film Inception. And if you haven't watched Inception, go do it for your homework tonight. Inception is a good, I use it as a good framework for talking about how you can take people down into their subconscious. You know, the van is going off the bridge. 1 second in real time is an hour at level 1 in the subconscious, a day at level 2, a week at level 3, which kind of reflects the way that thinking speeds up as you go deeper. And there was a point in that movie when the chief protagonist took somebody into the dream state down in the subconscious, and he started speaking halfway through a sentence. He was sort of saying, and you probably noticed that sometimes you find you're somewhere and you don't know how you got here. And they looked around and were like, oh, we're now sort of sitting in this little Parisian cafe. So one of the things I found can work, if you've got somebody in front of you who is really experiencing some strong emotions and it's kind of going on a little bit, very simple. Start talking halfway through a sentence, which means you start with and you speak lowercase. I don't know how to describe how you do that, but there's a way of speaking where you're not putting a capital letter at the beginning, right? And what you do is just speak quietly and just say, and the interesting thing we notice is that sometimes people experience physical manifestations of the emotional content of the neural pathway that they're currently accessing. And by the time you've said that, that's sort of hit their brain, they've heard that. And the whole thing subsides because that's such an odd thing to say, it immediately shifts them to a different part of their brain. They are no longer experiencing the emotions of that other part of the neural pathway, so gone. Oh, Nessa said that's a pattern interrupt. Thank you. I like when I get technical terms.
Yeah, we could, it's kind of reappraisal to a certain extent, and that's part of our job as a coach, is we don't want hardening the neural pathway that is not functional, but we are allowing the space for them to investigate other ways of looking at things.
Shall we, how are we doing for time? The entire session has about, what, another 34 minutes to run?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Should we start triggering, well, two things. We could either just go and say what questions, people are putting a lot of useful comments in. Has anybody got questions they want to ask? Or should we go on and talk about the arise?
Well, I think our habits are going to be important, Tony. I mean, I'm happy to sort of, okay, Venita says she's got a question there, but I'm happy to take the questions. But I think those, when we start talking about instilling new habits and ways of being, I think it's going to be important, because coaching is, yes, about having these wonderful conversations, but how is it about creating sustainable change as well?
Yes.
Venita, do you want to add your questions? How to support a coach who feels insecure at work? Okay, that's Bhaskar.
Again, insecure, that's an interpretation.
Okay.
Vanitha said you've posted your question above on gender and culture.
Okay, so Vanitha, I'm going to answer that maybe without getting lost in cross-cultural, you know, gender differences etc., is that we're coaching human brains, in my experience. And whether I'm coaching in Asia, whether I'm coaching in the United States, yes, there are nuances. There's no question about that. I'm not just sweeping that out the window. But I'm coaching a human brain, and all humans have a prefrontal cortex. All human beings have neurochemistry. All human beings have a hippocampus and long-term memory that they can access in order to find wisdom, etc. So I find that sometimes, I mean, even in Africa, I'm coaching people that almost cannot speak the same language as me. And yet it's kind of okay. And Tony, you almost referenced it earlier. I call it that sacred space that we're facilitating for them. That's really all we're doing. You know, who cares about tools and all of that? It's just that sacred space for a human brain to function and discover itself in the best way possible.
Absolutely. And that's why coaching is the one communication mechanism that works so well anywhere in the world, because it goes beyond genders and cultures. And so you're down at the one human to another human. Under the skin, it's all the same. Once you get into the brain, get into the subconscious, they're all the same. Yeah, that's the nice thing about it. And let's remember that culture is partly judgments that we hold about groups of people. Culture is partly adopted, agreed behavioral habits that have developed over thousands of years. And once you get underneath those, it changes. Yeah, I mean, we see this beautifully around Asia a lot. You see it in Singapore, in Japan, in India. You meet a 30-year-old or a 25-year-old. You can almost, in the first 10 minutes of conversation, tell whether they ever lived, worked, or been educated overseas, in maybe Europe or in the States. You know, it's all there for change. They're just human beings. Yeah. So yes, let's talk about building new habits. I've always observed it's the hard part. But one of the things I've noticed, and I've done this with my coaching clients for years, and we programmed it into the coaching app because it just seemed to work so well. Two things. As people make behavioral change, in here the change feels big. Outwardly, it's not so big. So it seems to help us to reach out to people and get calibration, feedback, if you like, on how we're doing. That seems to help. And also, if you've got somebody, for example, who's working with a team of 5 different people, each one will react to your change differently. And it just seems as though the brain is capable of building new patterns. You don't have to analyze, how do I need to be with this one or this one? But by simply getting that calibration feedback about what change are you seeing? How is it going? To what extent are you seeing it? The brain seems to be able to just start to automatically go, okay, with this one, I need to be more like that. With this one, I'm okay. So that's one aspect I wanted to hear about. The other one is the repetition. There was an interesting book out fairly recently called Nudges, which digs into how that sort of stuff works. I found some research last year from, I think, one of the Northern European universities. They actually did an intervention over a period of time of hitting people 2 or 3 times a day with mobile phone-based nudges. And given that my whole product is based on working that way, it was really interesting that they said, yes, it works, it helps. So, the nudges, what's going on? It seems to work.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you've actually said, you've said a lot of things here. You've said feedback.
Sorry, yes.
No, it's fantastic. You said about going and doing things differently, how much time it takes, reminding people of the new behavior, etc. So essentially, the reality of the matter is that human beings are pattern-making machines. That's what we are. We are designed to work off habits, because it's far too exhausting for me to think, push clutch, change gear, press brake every single time I get in my car to drive. So I've created a habit of just doing it automatically. We wire as much as possible into our subconscious and unconscious, the basal ganglia, the habit center of the brain, the hippocampus, into that kind of reptilian, automatic, subconscious, unconscious, instinctive brain. It's part of the way we are wired. So habits are very useful, okay, because it allows us to free up space in our prefrontal cortex to be conscious, to be thinking, to be mindful, etc. So I think acknowledging the fact that everything that we do is a habit can be really useful, just for people to be able to say, well, whatever the behavior is that I want to do, it's just a matter of changing the pattern that I have created. And again, going back to why is it important? You know, what difference is it going to make? If people don't understand the why, they're not going to change the behavior. And I always say the difference between a good habit and a bad habit is a good habit, or wait, let's start with a bad habit. A bad habit, short-term pain, short-term gain, long-term pain. Okay. Mm-hmm. Good habit, short-term pain, long-term gain. So when people just sometimes understand that definition, okay, all I'm doing is changing my behavior. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to take effort and consciousness. I'm not just automatically going to be able to rely on my old behavior. Just that fact itself, that we focus on what is the long-term gain, and I understand that there is going to be short-term pain. I accept that. I'm present with it. And it comes back to mindfulness. Som, I think it was you that was talking about mindfulness earlier on. It's about one of the greatest strategies to shift a behavior is to use mindfulness. Most of what we're doing is automatically going to what is just ingrained behavior. Tony, I'm going off at a tangent here. In terms of repetition and in terms of how long does it take to change a behavior, the jury is out. The research is anything from 21 days. You've probably heard the latest research I read from Harvard University a couple of weeks ago. They're saying 66 days, which I'm quite enjoying at the moment, and I'm experimenting with it through lockdown of deciding what's the new thing I'm going to try, setting myself a 66-day challenge. And after 66 days, if you told me last year that I would do yoga, I would have fallen off my chair laughing. I set myself a 66-day challenge, and now every day of my life I do yoga. It's become a pattern, it's become a part of my being. So there's a lot of different theories and analysis. It can even take 1 second to change a habit. If the motivation is high enough, we'll never engage again.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, isn't it? I mean, someone just made the point of coaches do tend to get judgmental. First skill we teach coaches is learn to suspend judgments. You can't stop them. They just happen. You know, we go from observation to interpretation so fast, most people don't even realize they've done it. But yes, recognizing judgments or suspending them, because you cannot coach from your judgments. And once you do that, you're kind of there. Sorry, that sidetracked me. What was it you just said?
No, I think it's important getting your clients not to judge themselves, because you're a human being, you know, and get all of these things that we've been talking about in the chat, where people say they've got a self-belief, a limiting belief, or they judge themselves, or they hard on themselves. All of that is a habit within itself. And so it's about accepting that, okay, this is what has evolved through where I am now. How do I bring consciousness, and what do I choose to change? And that's our job as a coach, is to create that space where a person can choose to change.
Yeah, now there's the word choice. So one of the things I hear over and over and over again, particularly when I'm brought in to help organizations change, is people saying change takes time. So I'm just going to put my belief out there. That's absolute rubbish. With a lot of these things, you have to split them up into more than one component. So for example, before you can execute a change, you have to have a decision to change. And I think most people's problem when they're trying to adopt a new behavior is they're saying the change takes time, but actually once you've made the decision to change, the commencement of change is instantaneous. The completion will depend on the scale of the change. Now, if you decided I am now going to do this, or I'm going to stop doing that, well, that's instantaneous once you've made the decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, Vanitha's also asking about what triggers that decision to change, and it's about kind of what triggers the need to change a behavior. Now, often, and I'm sorry, I know I like refer everything to neuroscience, but it's kind of why I'm here, I guess.
You're forgiven for fulfilling your purpose. Yeah.
Fulfilling my purpose. But actually, interestingly, Vanitha, when I help people understand the brain and that the brain has got the capacity to change, that often can just be the trigger. Because so many people come to us and they think, oh, well, that's the way I am. And they get trapped in the story that they've told themselves about how they do things or how difficult something's going to be, etc. So for us, it's about creating a space to change the story, really. And like Tony, you were saying about how accessing that future state, the current state, to really understand how am I limiting myself or whatever, what is really going on here, the future state to what is possible. And then that navigation of the space in between actually becomes almost the easy part.
Yep.
Tony, you mentioned something else that a lot of sort of habit books are writing about at the moment, and I find it incredibly useful. It's reminding ourselves to engage in the new behavior is half of the problem. Because automatically, when I go to brush my teeth, I'm going to take my right hand and I'm going to brush my teeth with my right hand. For me to consciously think, oh, I now want to change my behavior to brush my teeth with my left hand, it's not automatic. So having those reminders, having a lot of the habit experts talk about having small rules, and I think that's what you were also almost mentioning there, having, you know, when I walk into my office, I have a rule that I leave my phone in the other room. So therefore, I'm not going to go engage in the habit of constantly checking my WhatsApp messages, for example. So actually setting structures that support the progress of a new habit without having to be conscious thinking about it all the time. Very, very powerful tool to support behavioral change.
Yeah. You said something a short while ago that just triggered a thought for me. This is definitely going to go off topic. You want to go off topic?
We were given freedom, Tony, so go with
we were, so okay, we go off topic. So no, just triggered by the fact, I mean, we've got a lot of people on the call tonight who are based in India. And it just reminded me of a conversation I had in India, in Chennai years ago. So for context, I'm a career IT guy. That was what I did from messing around with mainframes in the 70s. My journey into coaching started in the mid-80s, where IBM sent me to go and learn non-directive coaching on the tennis courts with Timothy Galway. So that was the first thing. So I can coach a tennis player, right? Couldn't do anything else. And when I asked them, I get it, this works, how does it help me manage people in the office? The answer was, we've no idea. We're sports people. So I started right from back in the late 80s, starting to think and analyze about how to use this non-directive coaching style inside organizations. That was my first coach training. Then some years later, I did some more traditional stuff. And then a few years later, I got in with a group of people who were working at an energetic level. And that stuff I found has been really, really interesting, getting away from the mechanics and learning to get out of your conscious awareness, listen from your subconscious. You know, that empty-minded state you go to when you meditate. So of course, I was backwards and forwards every few weeks for a few years in India, back in the days when Nokia was building its phone factory in Chennai. And they went in 3 years from 10 people setting up a factory to, I think, about 30,000 employees. You know, it was wild. But when you're doing that kind of work in India and you reference anything about coaching at an energetic level, you get people who go, aha, okay, yeah, we get it, we know what you're talking about. Western cultures mostly struggle with it. Now, my take on it, it's not the fluffy woo-woo stuff, it's just pure quantum physics. You know, getting to a place where you can create an energetic connection with another being, and read signals that are not necessarily in your brain. Have you encountered that from a neuroscience perspective? Do you have any view on that sort of thing?
So when you say that, how would you articulate that just in a sentence?
Energetics, the learning to connect with somebody at an energetic level, and so that you are connecting and moving the energy between the two.
Sure. Okay, we've got another hour and 3.5 hours here to go there. But I think what I'm just going to go to there to try and give a short answer to such a deep subject is the fact of the matter is whenever we are in physical presence with another human being, we have got hundreds and billions of pieces of data, or anywhere, whatever, even if we're alone, hundreds and billions of data that we're interpreting. So much of it happens at a subconscious and unconscious level. I mean, and one, as I think it's important to think about for coaches, is something like pheromones. What are pheromones? Pheromones are subconscious smell. It's not conscious smell. Now, there's either a match in our pheromones or there's a mismatch. Often that's the kind of coaching, what do you call it, the chemistry session that so many coaches do. Sadly lacking, by the way, in this kind of virtual environment. Oxytocin, obviously, sadly lacking in this kind of virtual environment. So our intuition is about interpreting, and there's an energetic vibration that occurs between two people. We also are listening to our own bodies, because consciousness, I talk about consciousness, prefrontal cortex, but actually we have consciousness in every cell in our body. You know, I mean, we could get really deep there. So this human engagement is in such a, there's such a complexity to it, which, by the way, is limited. I see some really bringing it to COVID and bringing it to the new normal, because that is relevant at the moment. Because what we're finding is that our brains, there's nothing normal about the new. It is not a natural way for us to engage. Technology has been the most massive, exponentially dramatic shift that our brain has had to tolerate in the last 200,000 years. And our brains are struggling to keep up with it. So I think sorry, Tony, I'm now rambling a little, but to try and wrap up what you're saying is, I think that the complexity of that human relationship and the complexity of our engagement, so much that happens at a much deeper level than consciousness, is what you're experiencing in those kind of circumstances. Not sure if I'm answering you there.
No, I'm with you. I think we're on the same page.
Yeah, sorry, I see Pascal's talking about Dan Siegel's mindset. And a few people have mentioned mindfulness. And mindfulness is really, and what Dan Siegel very, very much talks about, he talks about that, the social and relational field between two people. He talks about the being present within that relational field, and to self and to the other person. So that mindfulness and consciousness, instead of being on automatic, truly is the most highly evolved, call it spiritual, to risk maybe some censure there, way that we can actually possibly exist. And I truly believe that that's what coaching does. I know I'm quite almost religious about coaching, but I do believe it creates that conscious, sacred space that allows people to access their higher being rather than their prehistoric automatic.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the more, as coaches, the more we work on that, on working at those higher levels, the more effective we can be, because everything has an energy. You can connect with everything. I think one of the problems, just beneath it, and just talking about brains are fatigued with all this moving online stuff, it's easy. Cut off the visuals. It's interesting the way people seem to have completely forgotten telephone calls. Yeah, everything has to be video. No, it doesn't, because that just gives you some of the measures and none of the others. Just go back to audio connections. Shut off the cameras.
Can I validate that, Tony? Because when you and I were in a normal, what we would have been 2 years ago in a WhatsApp conversation here, or maybe on a telecon, did you remember those?
Yep.
Kind of what I promise you, what I would be doing right at this moment is my feet would be on this desk, okay? I'd be looking back and looking at the birds and the trees outside my window. Instead of that, I've spent the last hour and 15 minutes like this. Okay, it is exhausting, it is taxing. I've also got limited amount of data to interpret here. Again, all that subconscious, unconscious triggers. So my conscious brain is trying to understand Tony and what, you know, is his voice and his body language and is there congruence. And now here's my biggest problem with the virtual environment. You can see I'm quite passionate about this subject because I don't believe that we're acknowledging virtual is fantastic and I'd rather we had this than have nothing at all. But here's for me the real problem. Tony, I have just sat and looked at my own face for the last hour and 15 minutes. When have you sat in a meeting with a mirror? Okay. And that's one of the problems with, that's one of the many, many problems. There's also many wonderful things, but I think we can learn to navigate these virtual engagements in a much more effective way. Now, turning off the camera is also all very well. I know if I'm having a Teams meeting, everybody's then on their emails, and we know that multitasking is a myth and the cognitive resources spent there, there's zero cognitive resources here. So there's risks to that. But I think if we can be conscious and if we can really understand what is the impact that these things are having, so then we can, between us, navigate what is the best way possible for us to
doing the right thing. Yes, doing the right thing at the right time. I mean, yes, you don't just turn off all the videos. Sometimes you want everybody on because they can see each other. They don't feel neglected. But yeah, it's very question of the right medium for communication, and we've kind of lost that.
Use it. Yeah, how do we use it? Yeah, that's how our brains are exhausted, and a lot of people are saying, how do we coach in this time? And Tony, there is no question in my mind that there's nothing normal about where we are right now. It is an unnatural brain environment. The addiction to technology, the rapid onslaught of information that we're getting. I gave a talk on tech today, so I don't want to go there, but the disconnect from human beings, the fear, the anxiety, the worry. I know there's no such thing as anything that's certain, but at least that we had a degree of certainty about how we could progress. Now, all of that has been taken away. People are in a threat state. People are trying to, and also there's a kind of delusional state that can be set up for a lot of people. For example, an introvert will go, oh, it's fantastic. I'm now working from home. But in actual fact, even an introvert needs oxytocin in order for his neural pathways to work effectively, and they need that connection. So, yeah, but it is the reality of where we are right now. I think as coaches, we need to acknowledge that reality. Allow people, if they're feeling their pain, to, how do you work with that pain? Tell me what it's about, giving them a safe space.
Yeah. You know, an interesting one, that question that just came up about how does this impact the future of coaching? In some parts of the world, coaching has always been done remotely by telephone. Singapore is a small place, so Singapore clients think they need to show up in person. They've now learned that they don't. I have never advocated coaching by video, because for the very reason of, the eye contact, and you don't know what's going around them, you're getting false signals and it's just too confusing. The best thing to do, headphones, so that you've got the other person's voice in the center of your head. Never use speakers. And whether you're coaching over the internet or just on a phone call, headphones and speakers, because when you just have their voice in the center of your head, you can then focus on reaching out and making all those other connections that we've been talking about.
Create of focus and attention, opposed to the exhaustion that the screen is actually creating, which in essence actually becomes an obstruction.
Yeah, totally and absolutely. So, was there anything else that we had in our framework we wanted to talk about?
Should I kind of tell them about the bridges quickly, just so that they know that?
Oh, yeah. We were kind of teasing them on that one, weren't we? That was a little bit, yeah.
So it was just...
Which bridge do you want to talk about first?
Well, maybe the Choluteca Bridge. I'm not sure about my pronunciation. So really, oh, thank you, Tony. That's fantastic. Okay, so here's the Choluteca Bridge, and really, why we were talking about what coaches do is we're creating bridges from here to there. We're helping connect neural pathways across synapses, etc. So the metaphor was the two different bridges that we had. The first was the Choluteca Bridge, which was in the Honduras and was built by the finest engineers to withstand the greatest environmental challenges or meteorological challenges, because it's an area that has got a lot of meteorological challenges. And basically these engineers built this bridge, and then there was this hurricane that came through, a tornado that came through, and basically what the tornado did is it literally changed the geographical landscape. And what happened, the river changed its course, and now the bridge no longer crossed it. So the bridge is sitting suspended over solid ground with no roads leading to or from it. So it was a bridge that often we're creating these bridges of what we should do, what we have to do. Why don't you do it this way? It's always been done that way, but that bridge actually becomes useless. And I commented to you, Tony, that my daughter would call this an epic fail in teenage language. Okay, she's not a teenager, but she still uses the word epic. So then we have our other kind of bridge, which Tony and I said is more something, a kind of wisdom that we as coaches need to, metaphorically, what it represents. And this kind of bridge is called a Bailey Bridge. And this was a bridge that was developed in the 1940s by the British military. And it really, it's been credited with creating a significant role in ending World War II. And this bridge really required few tools, not a lot of equipment, and it could be constructed by hand at any time, and it could be moved wherever it was needed. It was adaptable, basically, for any crossing. And I guess metaphorically, really what Tony and I are trying to say today is that we can have the finest tools and techniques and methods in the world, but what we need to do is we need to be adaptable, we need to be creative, and we need to provide help find resources, or help our clients find resources that they can take anywhere. We're talking about in coaching creating sustainable change, not just I'm better in the way I manage my team, but I'm better as a human being in the way I engage with human beings, including myself as well. Okay, so have I used I've seen if I got the bridge you're mentioning in another webinar recently. I don't think I've mentioned this in another webinar, but I have written a blog on it, which we'll share as well. So Tony, yeah, this is you and I building bridges across brains and across continents, I guess.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess the question is, does anybody have any questions? I mean, we've picked up and played a lot as we've gone through. Are you feeling totally swamped and overwhelmed, or is there anything you'd like to ask? How do I know as a coach the engagement's not working? I think your client will be able to tell you that.
Awesome. Yeah.
Because, so coaching is the process of making people think. Well, I think one of the things worth mentioning is you've got to work at triggering thinking. If there's nothing else you do, just trigger thinking. But equally, you've got to be able to tune into the stuff that you see on people's faces and on the bodies, muscle movements, skin tone, coloration, eye movements that tell you they are thinking. Because as long as you can read that you've triggered thinking, some people will still say what comes out of their mouth and what's going on in their brain are totally disconnected. You know, it's not uncommon that the client who says, oh, I'm stuck. Well, if you landed a question that triggered some thought, then I guarantee something will happen. You'll see a flicker, an eye movement. And even if their mouth says, I don't know, I'm stuck, you can just go, that's bullshit. I just saw a thought happen. Tell me what it was. So you can just call it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice question there from Sriram, Tony. talking about the present state where they are right now. Can you give some tips on how best to open up that conversation on present state?
That's really the beginning of the coaching conversation. They come in, you settle down, you get your coffee, and it's really about saying, so what is it you need to work on today?
And how are you feeling?
Yeah, how are you feeling? What do you need to work on? Needs, not wants. A few key bits that if there's anybody on the call tonight who's sort of like working towards their ACC or thing to watch out for. The words you use are important. If you ask, what do you want to talk about today, as opposed to what do you need to talk about today, you'll get a totally different response. And also, if you should use presuppositions that there's some work to be done. So what would you like to talk about is not as powerful as saying, what do you want to work on?
What do you want to shift? Yeah.
I love want to shift.
As well, to ask people what needs to be spoken about. So
yes,
in other words,
and every now and again, if it's not your first conversation, if you're partway through a series of coaching with them, and you can't do this every time it gets formulated, but just every once in a while, when they sit down, just look them straight in the eyes and go, so what's the question you're hoping I won't ask you today?
Yeah.
And then you'll see a flicker on the face and you go, yep, that's it. That's what we're working on today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just the Coacharya bridge, guys, it's a common metaphor in leadership for about how we need to think differently. I think, and Tony, it was quite fun how we came up with it, because for some reason I think I'd read about it and I was mentioning it to you, and then you told me about the Bailey Bridge, and then we started making that connection, and that's kind of part of coaching. It's using metaphor, it's using visuals, it's using story really to help people get, like you said, into that relaxed brain state so that they can create different kinds of realities. And that's what you and I did together. We were having a conversation, and then
absolutely. And and if we go back to the beginning of tonight's conversation, everybody, coaching is about helping people get absolute clarity on where they are now, absolute clarity on where they want to be, and then they will get the clarity on what they need to do to get there. Coaching is a Bailey Bridge. You can go anywhere. You can't start building the Bailey Bridge until you know where you are. And you can't actually construct it until you then figure out where you want to land. What's the other side? What does it look like? Yeah. And it really is that now to future. That's the framework to play with.
Anywhere, because it's not only just because that's really, I guess, is apart from sustainable change, is I loved working when I worked as a therapist or a counselor. It was fantastic because people came back to me for years and years and years. But I always say to people, I've done my job as a coach when you don't need me anymore, because they then have their own Bailey bridges.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we're done.
Yes.
Thank you, Lisa.
We are just about wrapped up. A couple of minutes to close this. Oh my gosh, you guys, I agree. I know a couple people mentioned it. This is worth a rewatch and a rewatch, and then one more, and then a reflection, and then a rewatch. This was phenomenal. What my biggest takeaways, and I have a million questions. We'll have to reconnect in LinkedIn and continue the conversation. What really hit me was about keeping it simple, really just keeping it simple. For me, a lot had come up about being present to the assumptions that I'm making, be present to the beliefs that I've adapted. I was thinking this morning, I woke up and 6 days a week I go and I work out, and on my way home, I'm sitting here thinking about my day, and in my mind was deciding, I'm tired, I'm exhausted, this is going to be a long day. All of these conclusions were coming up as I was just on autopilot. And instead I looked at them and I said, no. And instead I vocalized myself, I am awake, I am energized, I am revitalized, this is going to be a great day. And I literally said that in my car over and over. And so that was That was a really great reminder. It was a little kismet that the conversation that we had today, because I think that speaks to coaching mastery, and it speaks to our ability to be effective. You know, when I think about habits and I say to myself, oh gosh, that might be a tough habit to break, I literally in some cases will say, shh, you know, nope. This is an easy habit to break because I am the boss and I am telling my brain right now, brain, are you listening? Subconscious, hello, no problem. Yeah. It's already been done. And so this just reinvigorated me quite a bit to just realize that I have this beautiful, most intuitive computer times a million in my mind. And yet I have to remember that I am not my thoughts, and I can decide, and we can create change, and all things are possible. So on that note, thank you for that. Thank you for the gift. This was so wonderful. This was a phenomenal conversation. You have awakened a lot of old learning that I just realized I need to build some deeper neural pathways, and write some things down, and make sure that this stays, and remember that, you know, all things are possible with a strong why, and simply choosing it.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was phenomenal. Thank you for being with us. And again, we'll have other sessions for our guests. Join us in a couple of hours for another thrilling conversation. And again, keep the conversation going in LinkedIn. All of the conversation was phenomenal and insightful and authentic. And I'm grateful to be here with you all. And thank you for letting me share time and space with you. Thank you, Doctor. And thank you, Tony. Be well. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay. You all take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.